Listen closely. I'm about to tell you something they whispered in the marble corridors of Vienna's coffeehouses, where Freud once sat nursing absinthe and watching couples destroy each other with perfect manners. There's a cathedral inside every woman's mind, not built of stone and stained glass, but of every man who ever tried too hard to matter. And you, my desperate friend, you've been kneeling in the wrong pew. Picture this. A moth, drunk on moonlight, circles a candle flame, burns its wings, falls, crawls back, burns again. The candle never moves, never reaches, never begs. It simply is. And in that terrible stillness lies a truth so grotesque that modern dating coaches would rather sell you another course than admit it. The moment you stop performing your elaborate mating dance is the precise moment she starts hearing music. I once knew a clockmaker in Prague who told me something while his trembling hands adjusted a mechanism older than memory itself. The gears that run backwards, he said, tobacco-stained fingers pointing at my chest. Those are the ones that keep perfect time. He was talking about pocket watches, but he might as well have been describing the machinery of obsession. You see, there's a study from 2024. Researchers at Copenhagen's Institute for Behavioral Paradoxes discovered something delicious. Women's neural pathways light up like Byzantine fire when confronted with what they termed productive uncertainty. Not mystery for mystery's sake, you understand, but the specific flavor of absence that suggests presence elsewhere. The man who doesn't text back immediately because he's genuinely absorbed in restoration of a vintage motorcycle. The one whose attention drifts mid-conversation, not from rudeness, but because he's mentally solving equations that have nothing to do with her beauty. The cathedral of indifference isn't built from cruelty. God, no. That's what amateurs think. It's constructed from something far more intoxicating. Genuine disinterest in being anyone's salvation. You become the empty church where she goes to confess desires she didn't know she harbored. Think of Kierkegaard's trembling hand as he wrote about Regina Olsen, the woman he loved enough to leave. The moment I make her happy, he scrawled in his journal, is the moment I cease to exist in her imagination. He understood what you're only beginning to grasp, that presence, constant and reassuring, is the slow morphine drip that kills passion. There's an old Romanian folktale about a shepherd who fell in love with the moon. Every night he'd climb the mountain, arms outstretched, begging her to descend. One night, exhausted, he fell asleep in the meadow. When he woke, the moon's silver light had tangled itself in his hair, left kisses on his eyelids. The moon had come closest when he'd stopped reaching. But here's where it gets properly dark, where the velvet curtains part to reveal not a bedroom, but an autopsy table. The cathedral of indifference only works if it's genuine. Women possess emotional sonar that would make military submarines weep with envy. They can detect the difference between a man who's genuinely consumed by his purpose and one who's play-acting distance while checking his phone every 30 seconds. In Tokyo, they have a word, tsundoku, for books you buy but never read, letting them pile up unattended. Become her tsundoku. Be the unread book whose spine she runs her fingers across while choosing something else, always wondering what secrets you contain. The book she tells her friends about. I haven't opened it yet, but something about it. The candle wax drips, forms patterns on the table that look like the geographical map of every conversation you'll never have, and somewhere in the humid thickness of a summer evening, while cicadas scream their 17-year hunger, she's thinking about why you haven't called. You want to know the most delicious paradox? The moment you truly stop caring whether she thinks of you, that's when she can't stop. It's not a technique. It's not a strategy. It's what happens when you finally understand that you were never meant to be anyone's entire world, just a strange moon in their peripheral vision, affecting their tides from a distance they can't quite calculate. Here's my question for you, whispered like a secret at a funeral. What would you become if you stopped needing to be chosen? She only tastes what she cannot swallow whole. There's a restaurant in Copenhagen that serves a dish you can never finish. The moment your fork approaches the last bite, the chef adds more. Not out of generosity, but from a perverse understanding of human desire. The establishment has a 3-year waiting list. People mortgage their homes for a reservation. They leave hungrier than they arrived. And therein lies tonight's second truth. Served on a plate of bone china so thin, you can see your own loneliness through it. A woman's desire is a furnace that burns hottest on the wood of incompletion. Feed it too much certainty, and watch it suffocate on its own smoke. Let me tell you about Marie Claire, a perfumer I met in Grasse, who spent 7 years creating a fragrance that would only reveal itself as it evaporated. "The nose," she explained, crushing violet petals between fingers that had forgotten every lover's name, "only truly knows what it's losing." The perfume sold for €8,000 an ounce. Women would spray it on letters they'd never send. You've been taught to be reliable, present, available. Some well-meaning fool probably told you that consistency builds trust. That trust builds love. They lied, or worse, they told you a truth meant for different creatures than the ones we've become. In our age of infinite options, constant presence isn't comfort. It's a death certificate written in advance. Consider the neuroscience. Dr. Helen Fisher's 2023 study found that dopamine, that cocaine cousin of a neurotransmitter, only floods the system in anticipation, never in satisfaction. The woman checking her phone for your message experiences more pleasure in the checking than in the reading. You want to own real estate in her nervous system? Become the notification that never quite arrives when expected. But listen, lean closer, because this is where the folklore gets its teeth. There's a Slavic myth about firebird feathers. Each feather burns with its own light, but the moment you grasp one, it turns to ash. The only way to possess their light is to follow their trail, always one feather behind, never quite catching up. Ivan the Fool knew this. That's why, in the end, the firebird came to him. I'm going to tell you something that will sound like cruelty, but tastes like liberation. Your full attention is a gift so overwhelming that it becomes a burden. Have you ever been loved too much? It's like drowning in honey, sweet, golden, and absolutely suffocating. The human psyche wasn't built for constant sunshine. We're creatures of weather, of storm and calm, of presence and void. Here's what Schopenhauer understood while watching dancers at a Viennese ball. A man who gives a woman everything she wants is teaching her, with perfect precision, how to want nothing. He died alone, but his words fucked with more minds than any lover's touch ever could. The truly intoxicating man is a half-finished symphony. He gives her the melody but makes her imagine the harmony. He's the novel that ends mid-sentence, forcing her to write the conclusion in her dreams. Every interaction is a door left slightly ajar. Enough light to see there's a room beyond, never enough to map its contents. In New Orleans, there's a jazz musician who plays the same song every night, but never plays the ending. Tourists complain. Locals return obsessively, each convinced that tonight, finally, they'll hear how it resolves. He's been doing this for 23 years. The same woman has been sitting in the corner booth for the last 15, ordering whiskey she doesn't drink, waiting. Modern research from the Kinsey Institute, 2024, reveals something your grandfather knew intuitively. Partial reinforcement, unpredictable rewards, creates stronger attachment than consistent availability. Slot machines know this. Drug dealers know this. And the woman you're trying too hard to impress? Her nervous system knows this with a knowledge older than language. You text her good morning every day. You've become wallpaper. You text her good morning randomly when the moon strikes you, when the coffee tastes particularly like redemption. Now you're weather. Something she checks for, plans around, discusses with friends. Picture this. You're mid-conversation with her, and your phone rings. Old, you would have ignored it, proud of your focus, your dedication to her presence. New, you answers it. It's about something that matters to you, really matters, not performatively matters. You handle it with the casual competence of someone whose world extends beyond her gravitational pull. When you hang up and return to her, there's something different in her eyes. For the first time, she's wondering what else you might walk away to handle. The hunger that feeds itself isn't built on games or manipulation. It's built on the terrible truth that we only value what might slip through our fingers. Be water, not a lake. Be music, not a recording. Be the meal she remembers but can never quite recreate, no matter how many times she tries to follow the same recipe. Tell me something. And be honest, though honesty burns. When did you start believing that being chosen was more important than being choosing? Magnets only attract from distance. Too close, and they repel. A physics professor in Berlin once showed me two magnets dancing. "Watch," he said, his eyes reflecting 40 years of marriage that had somehow survived. He moved them closer. They lunged toward each other with violent hunger. But then, past a certain point, he flipped one. Same magnets, same charge, but now they pushed away with equal violence. "This," he said, setting them at the perfect distance where they trembled with desire but couldn't touch. "This is where you want to live." Tonight's third confession comes wrapped in electromagnetic fields and the taste of iron in your mouth. You've been trying to decrease distance when you should have been increasing charge. There's something they discovered in Stockholm's Karolinska Institute in 2025. They called it emotional magnetism decay. The closer two people get, the weaker their individual magnetic fields become, until they're just two neutral bodies occupying space, generating nothing but the mundane friction of proximity. But maintain distance. The charge builds until the air between you could power cities. Let me paint you a scene. Venice, 1723. Giacomo Casanova, yes, that beautiful bastard, wrote something in his memoirs that his English translators censored for 2 centuries. Not because it was sexual, but because it was too dangerous for married men to read. "The moment a woman knows she has you," he wrote by candlelight while a countess waited in his bed, "is the moment you cease to exist as a man and begin to exist as furniture, comfortable, reliable, and invisible." But Casanova's secret wasn't his absence. Any fool can be absent. It was his presence. When he was there, he was lightning in a bottle. Concentrated masculine energy that didn't diffuse itself trying to be everything she needed. He was exactly what he was. Turned up to 11, take it or leave it. Most took it. Then he left. You want to know what polarity really means? It's not about being an alpha gorilla beating your chest. God, how tedious. It's about being so ruthlessly yourself that you create a force field others either enter or avoid. No middle ground, no neutral zone. You're either mountain or valley, never plains. Consider the Bedouins of the Sahara. They have a saying, "The oasis that moves is just a mirage, but the oasis that stays in one place while the desert shifts around it, that's where life gathers." You've been a traveling oasis, repositioning yourself based on her comfort, her needs, her temperature. Meanwhile, she's dying of thirst for something that won't move just because she asked it to. Here's where modern men have been chemically castrated by good intentions. You've been taught that flexibility is virtue, that compromise is love, that meeting her halfway is the goal. But halfway is where magnetic fields cancel out. Halfway is beige. Halfway is the relationship equivalent of elevator music, present but not heard, felt but not remembered. The 2024 UCLA study on attraction patterns found something that would make dating coaches weep into their vision boards. Women reported highest attraction to men who maintained what researchers called positional integrity, staying exactly where and who they were, forcing her to navigate toward or away, never sideways. There's a tango dancer in Buenos Aires who hasn't changed his routine in 30 years. Same moves, same music, same corner of the same milonga. Women fly from Tokyo, from Stockholm, from New York, not because he adapts to them, but because he doesn't. They enter his world, learn his rhythm, or they don't dance. The floor is never empty. You think being magnetic means being attractive to everyone? That's not magnetism. That's prostitution of the self. True magnetism means being so specifically charged that you violently repel as many as you attract. You want everyone to like you? Congratulations, you've achieved the magnetic force of wet cardboard. Nietzsche, mad and brilliant, understood this when he wrote, "The man who stands for everything falls for anything." But here's what he whispered to his sister in his final days of sanity. The man who stands for something specific becomes a compass point. Others navigate by him, even when sailing away. Picture yourself as a lighthouse. Do you chase ships? Do you dim your light for vessels that complain it's too bright? Do you change your position based on traffic patterns? Or do you simply burn with perfect consistency, knowing that those who need what you offer will navigate the rocks to reach you? The polarity principle isn't about playing games. It's about having such a clear charge, such a defined field, that others feel it in their bones. She should know within minutes of meeting you exactly what weather you bring. Not because you tell her words are for amateurs, but because your presence has its own atmospheric pressure. I knew a blacksmith once who worked with ancient techniques. His workshop was unbearably hot, filled with smoke and the ring of metal on metal. No music, no comfort, no accommodation for visitors. Women would stand in his doorway for hours, watching him work, breathing in sulfur and satisfaction. He never looked up. When asked why they stayed, they couldn't explain it. "It's just real," one said. Ash in her hair, blisters on her feet from standing on hot stone. This is my challenge to you, spoken in the language of electrons. Stop trying to be compatible. Start trying to be essential or repulsive with no room between. What would happen if you stopped modulating your frequency to match hers and instead broadcast at such a clear signal that she either tunes in completely or changes the station? Your broken places are where her fascination enters. In the Museum of Broken Relationships in Zagreb, there's an exhibit that shouldn't exist. A love letter never sent, written on the back of a suicide note that was also never used. The curator told me it's their most visited piece. People stand before it weeping, though they can't explain why. "Perhaps," she said, adjusting her glasses that had been broken and fixed with gold, "because it's the only honest thing in the entire building. And tonight, I'm going to tell you why your perfection is killing her desire, and why the thing you're most ashamed of is probably your only interesting feature." The Japanese have a practice called kintsugi, filling broken pottery with gold, making the repaired piece more valuable than the original. But the West misunderstands this, thinks it's about making broken things beautiful. It's not. It's about making broken things honest. The gold doesn't hide the cracks. It illuminates them, says, "Here's where the universe tried to destroy me and failed. Let me tell you about wounded gods, because that's what you need to become. Not a perfect statue, but a deity with visible scars, each one a story that ends with, and yet, I'm still here." In 2023, researchers at Harvard studied what they called attractive vulnerability, and they found that women's brains literally reorganized themselves when presented with men who displayed what they termed integrated damage. Not weakness, not victimhood, but the specific quality of having been broken and rebuilt with full consciousness of the breaking. You've been hiding your fault lines like there's something shameful, spackling over your cracks with achievements and cologne, presenting yourself like a museum piece behind glass. Look, but don't touch. Admire, but don't examine too closely. Meanwhile, she's dying to run her fingers along your broken edges, to find the places where you're held together with nothing but will and whiskey. Here's what Hemingway knew when he wrote, "We're all broken. That's how the light gets in." But here's what he didn't live long enough to understand. It's also how fascination gets in. A perfectly smooth surface reflects everything and absorbs nothing. But rough surfaces, broken surfaces, scarred surfaces, they create shadows where imagination lives. There's a sculptor in Florence who only works with flawed marble, pieces other artists reject. Perfect stone, he says, cigarette dangling from lips that have kissed failure more than success, makes perfect statues. But flawed stone makes gods. His pieces sell for millions, not despite the flaws, because of them. Consider the psychology. A woman meets a perfect man, successful, handsome, no visible damage. Her nervous system immediately knows something's wrong. Either he's lying, or worse, he's never really lived. He's a museum piece, a theory rather than a practice. But a man with visible repairs? That's a map of survival. That's evidence of resilience. That's proof he's been tested by forces that would have destroyed weaker men. You want to know the most seductive story you can tell? Not your successes. Those are just participation trophies from capitalism. Tell her about the time you lost everything and built it back different. Tell her about the woman who destroyed you so thoroughly that you had to invent a new version of yourself from the ashes. Tell her about the father wound that took you 20 years to turn into fuel. But here's the crucial thing, and listen closely because this is where most men fuck it up. You don't tell these stories seeking sympathy. Sympathy is the death of desire. You tell them like a warrior showing scars from battles won, not a patient showing symptoms to a nurse. The wounded god paradox works because it solves the essential riddle of attraction. How can she feel safe with someone dangerous? How can she trust someone free? The answer is in your wounds. They prove you've been dangerous to yourself and survived, been free enough to fail and recovered. In ancient Greece, they had a term, hamartia, often translated as fatal flaw, but actually meaning missing the mark. Every tragic hero had one, but here's what your English teacher didn't tell you. The flaw wasn't what destroyed them. The flaw was what made them worth watching. Nobody remembers perfect heroes. We remember Achilles' heel, Odysseus' pride, Hamlet's hesitation. A psychiatrist in Vienna, one of Freud's last living students, told me something while we drank schnapps in her apartment overlooking the Danube. Women don't fall in love with men. They fall in love with men's relationships to their own darkness. Show me a man who's integrated his shadow, and I'll show you a woman who can't look away. The wounded god paradox isn't about trauma dumping or wearing dysfunction like a badge. It's about something far more dangerous, being so comfortable with your own damage that you can joke about it, build from it, Occasionally let her see it bleeding through your composure like ink through wet paper. You've been trying to be Superman when she's looking for Lucifer after the fall. Beautiful, broken, unrepentant, but somehow still luminous. The light bearer who's been to hell and decided heaven was overrated anyway. So here's my question, asked while lightning illuminates the cracks in everything. What spectacular way did life break you, and why are you still pretending it didn't happen? When you need nothing from her, she needs everything from you. And now we arrive at the final door, the one marked with symbols that hurt to read. Behind it lies the most terrible and liberating truth of all, the one that will either free you or destroy you, depending on whether you're ready to stop being a beggar at the feast of your own life. There's a monastery in Tibet where the monks practice something called deliberate forgetting. Every morning, they write down everything they desire on rice paper. Every evening, they burn it. Not to destroy desire, but to prove to themselves daily that they can survive without any of it coming true. They're the happiest humans I've ever met. They're also the ones women travel across the world to sit near, though touching is forbidden. Especially because touching is forbidden. The abundance of absence isn't about having nothing. It's about needing nothing, especially not from her. It's about being so ridiculously, impossibly full of your own existence that you become a sun, generating your own light, your own heat, your own gravitational field. Planets orbit suns, not the other way around. Let me tell you about the last man I met who truly understood this. He was a butcher in Lisbon, hands permanently stained with blood and salt, apartment above his shop reeking of meat and metal. Women would come to buy a single sausage just to watch him work. He never flirted, never charmed, never pursued. When asked why women lingered in his shop, he shrugged. I'm too busy bleeding things dry to notice who's watching. This is what modern dating culture has backwards, upside down, and inside out. You think abundance means having options. That's not abundance. That's a portfolio. Real abundance means being so complete in your aloneness that another person becomes a choice, not a necessity. A garnish, not the meal. The 2025 Oxford study on relationship dynamics discovered something that contradicts every dating book written. The strongest predictor of being desired wasn't attractiveness, success, or even confidence. It was what they called autogenic happiness, the ability to generate satisfaction from within, independent of external validation. In other words, the people who needed relationships least were the ones who had the best ones. But here's where it gets properly dark, where the philosophical meets the pathological. The moment you truly don't need her is the moment she realizes she might need you. Not because you're playing games, but because you've become something rarer than gold in our age of desperate connection. A complete human being. Kierkegaard wrote, "The most painful state of being is remembering the future, particularly the one you'll never have." But he was wrong. The most painful state is needing someone else to complete your present. That's not love. That's vampirism with consent. There's an old Sufi story about a well that gave the sweetest water in the desert. People traveled for days to drink from it. Then one year, during a particularly brutal drought, everyone came with buckets, desperate to take as much as possible. The well dried up. But one man came with nothing. No bucket, no cup, not even cupped hands. He simply sat by the dry well, content to be near where water once was. The next morning, the well overflowed just for him. You want to become irresistible? Stop trying to be chosen and choose yourself so completely that others wonder what you know that they don't. Become the man who shows up to the party of life already drunk on his own existence, who doesn't need anyone else to validate his invitation. The abundance of absence means you love like a luxury, not a necessity. Your attention becomes a gift, not a payment for her presence. Your time becomes sacred, not something you scatter like breadcrumbs hoping birds will follow you home. In practical terms, you stop texting her because you're lonely. You text her because you have excess joy to share. You stop calling because you need to hear her voice. You call because your life is so full that it's overflowing, and she happens to be in the splash zone. You stop dating from hunger. You start dating from surplus. There's a billionaire in Monaco who only owns 3 suits, eats the same meal every day, and hasn't been in a relationship for 7 years. Women offer him everything: their bodies, their time, their futures. He declines politely, absorbed in building schools in villages they can't pronounce. He's not playing hard to get. He's genuinely hard to get, because he's already gotten himself. This is the ultimate paradox. The snake eating its own tail, the question that answers itself. The way to have her completely is to not need to have her at all. The way to be chosen is to stop auditioning. The way to be loved is to be so in love with your own strange existence that others want to know your secret. And here's the truth that will either liberate or terrify you. Most people will never understand this. They'll think you're selfish, cold, unavailable. They're right. You are unavailable. To anyone who requires you to be incomplete to make them feel whole, you're cold. To anyone who needs your warmth because they can't generate their own, you're selfish. With your energy, your attention, your precious and finite life force. But to the right woman, the one who's also practiced the abundance of absence, who's also a sun pretending to be a moon, you'll be the first real thing she's ever met. 2 complete circles overlapping, not because they have to, but because the view is better together. So here's my final question, asked in the silence between heartbeats. What would you do tomorrow if you knew, with absolute certainty, that you'd be alone for the rest of your life, and that this was not a tragedy, but a gift? Answer that. Live that. And watch how quickly alone becomes chosen.